My name is Wilhelmina Ostrander. Everyone calls me Billy. I'm 34 years old, and my family introduces me as still finding herself. Tonight, at the dinner where my sister presented her new fiancé like a closing gift, my mother would cut me off before I could say what I do for a living, and the whole table would laugh on cue. What my mother didn't know was that the polite stranger passing her the rolls had spent 11 months looking for me. Not for my sister. For me. And what happened 10 months later, at my sister's wedding, under a clock tower I knew better than anyone alive, in front of a national television crew, my family still can't talk about. I can. I've had practice being the only one at the table telling the truth. Welcome back to the channel, where family secrets come to light and quiet women find their voice. If you've ever been the one your family underestimated, the one they talked over, the one they explained away, this story is for you. Drop a comment below and subscribe. The dinner was at my parents' house in Cedar Falls, Iowa, and I knew it was a performance before I got my coat off. The good tablecloth was out. My sister Paige had made the pot roast she'd perfected for the county fair pageant back when she was runner-up, and I was the sister they left out of the holiday card photo. I'd come straight from my workshop, 12 minutes across town, and I'd scrubbed my hands twice, but clock oil lives in the creases of your knuckles like a confession. My mother seated me at the end by the hutch, outside what she calls the conversation zone, and that was normal. What wasn't normal was the staring. All through the salad, my family kept glancing at me the way you glance at a ladder left leaning against a wall, not with interest, with dread. My mother, Paige, even my father, Gene, peering over his glasses and then away. I checked my blouse for stains. Nothing. The fiancé was the only one who looked at me like a person. Theo, tall, careful manners, the kind of listener who turns his whole chair toward you. He asked my father about his tomatoes and actually followed up. Paige watched him the way you watch a lottery ticket. My mother watched him the way you watch an auditor. And in the gaps, everyone watched me. Warning looks passed around the table like a dish nobody wanted to hold. I'd been in this family 34 years, and I still couldn't read the whole code, but I knew the channel it came in on. Something about tonight was fragile, and they'd all agreed in advance the breakable thing was me. Then Theo turned, gave me his whole chair, and asked the politest question in the world. "And what do you do, Billy?" My mother set down her fork with the sound of a gavel. "Don't embarrass us." She said it lightly, brightly, the way you'd say more wine, and that is exactly what made it land like a slap. This wasn't anger. It was procedure. The table laughed, not cruel laughter, which somehow would have been kinder, rehearsed laughter, the laughter of people who had heard this bit before and knew their part. My aunt tittered into her napkin. My father studied his roast like it contained a message. And my sister, glowing, radiant, 10 hours away from perfect, leaned toward me with the smile she saves for cameras and said, "Maybe make something up this time so you don't sound so pathetic." More laughter, warmer now, relieved. The ladder had been moved safely back from the edge of the wall. Theo didn't laugh. I noticed that even then. He looked from my sister to my mother to me, the way a man checks a room's exits. I sat there with my hands in my lap and did the thing I have done at that table since I was 22. I smiled. I counted to 10 the way I count seconds when I'm letting a mainspring down slow, even pressure, no snap. Any other year that would have been the whole story. Smile, pass the rolls, drive back to the workshop, talk to the clocks. The clocks are more polite. But that afternoon I had come down off a ladder inside a bell tower in Dubuque, and my hands still smelled like 120. Years of somebody else's patience, and something in me was tired in a brand new place. So I didn't just smile this time. I opened my mouth. "I'm a horologist," I said, in the same voice I used to tell clients their grandfather's mantel clock is older than they think. "I repair mechanisms people gave up on." That was all, both true, level as a workbench. My mother inhaled through her nose, the sound of a correction being loaded, and pivoted to the honeymoon question she'd been saving. Because in her house, the way you handle a mess is you talk over it until it agrees to not exist. Paige picked it up on cue. Portugal, maybe Greece. And the table rolled on, relieved, and I reached for the rolls, already retreating back into my usual assignment, which is being furniture. Except Theo hadn't moved. He was looking at me, and his glass was suspended halfway between the table and his mouth, forgotten. There was an expression assembling itself on his face in slow motion. He set the glass down with the care of a man diffusing something. "I'm sorry," he said, and the table kept talking. "Ostrander," louder. The table quieted. I said, "Ostrander Time and Repair, out on Forge Street." "That's my shop." "Yes." And Theo did something no one has ever done at that table in my honor. He laughed one short amazed note and pulled out his phone. His thumbs moved. He turned the screen around. On it was a photograph of a brass clock movement, a fusee chain wound tight, the plates engraved with hairline detail work. I knew it the way you know your own handwriting. I'd spent 4 months of my life a foot away from that mechanism. "You did this," Theo said. "This is our foundations. My mother has been trying to reach you for 11 months. You could hear the refrigerator hum from 2 rooms away." My mother's face did something I'd never seen it do. It went looking for a script and came back empty. Paige's fork stopped in the air with a piece of her pageant pot roast still on it. Theo kept going because he had no idea he was rearranging a house as he spoke. His family ran the Whitcomb Heritage Trust, Historic Preservation, a name even my mother knew from the society page she pretends not to read. They had underwritten the restoration of the Aldermere Opera House, the old limestone theater downtown with the 4-faced clock tower everyone in the county could see from the highway, and the selection committee had ranked one horologist first for the tower mechanism. Me. Ostrander, the only documented apprentice of Silas Toomey, who had restored the Aldermere Tower the last time, back in 1988. "We wrote to your shop twice," Theo said, bewildered, almost laughing again. "You're a hard woman to reach." I said I was behind on my mail, which was true, and did not say that I assumed anything embossed was junk, which was also true. My mother rebooted mid-scene. "I'll give her that." "Well," she said, patting the table like it was a nervous horse. "Billy tinkers. She's always been mechanical." And Theo, polite, unbudging, terribly sincere, said, "Mrs. Ostrander, the committee doesn't rank tinkerers." Nobody laughed at that. My sister was looking at me with an expression I genuinely could not name, because I had never seen it aimed at me before. Recalculation. The fiancé they'd staged this whole dinner to impress had spent the evening trying not to stare at the family embarrassment, because where he came from, the embarrassment was the specialist. My mother reached for the wine and refilled glasses that were already full, pale, all of them. Just like I promised you, she got me alone in the kitchen while the others had coffee under the pretense of the dessert plates. My mother has a special voice for damage control, low and administrative, the voice of a courthouse records clerk, which is what she was for 24 years. "You will not take that job," she said, scraping frosting off a plate with surgical strokes. I asked why not. "Because that hall is where your sister is getting married." If this goes where it's going, you'd be underfoot at Paige's venue for months. Ladders, tarps, you in coveralls while his family walks through in suits. She rinsed the plate, set it in the rack, and looked at me. And for one strange second, I saw the thing underneath the whole performance. Not contempt. Fear. This wedding is bigger than your hobby, Billy. One wrong impression and people decide things about a family. That's all it takes. One. And there it was. The operating system laid bare on the kitchen counter. She had never once asked if I was good, because good wasn't the metric. Explainable was the metric. A daughter in coveralls was a liability, no matter what her hands could bring back to life. I dried my hands on her good towel and said I'd think about it, which we both knew was my polite lie, the single dialect of mine she's fluent in. I drove back to the workshop with the windows down. Above my bench, taped where Silas left it, is a yellowed card in his block printing. A clock that stopped hasn't died. It's just waiting on someone patient to wind it. At 11, my laptop pinged. The Whitcomb Heritage Trust, formal invitation to consult. Subject line, Tower. I read it 3 times and slept like a stone. Paige called the next morning, half apology, half audit. She wanted to know why I'd made it weird at dinner, which is our family's phrase for telling the truth in a load-bearing location. And in the tangle of it, the staring finally got explained. They'd briefed him. Before I ever walked in, my mother had prepared Theo the way you prep a guest for a dog that bites. Billy is between things. Billy is a little lost. Don't ask her too much, it's a sore subject. That's why the whole table had spent the salad course watching me like weather. They were waiting to see if the story would hold. I was a managed risk at my own family's table. It wasn't mean, Paige insisted. Mom just wanted the night to go well. Theo's family is, you don't understand what they're like. Everything matters with these people. I said it sounded exhausting, everything mattering. And she laughed before she remembered we weren't like that with each other. Then she went quiet. And in the quiet, she said the truest thing anyone in my family has ever said to me. You weren't supposed to matter tonight. I heard her hear it. The little intake of breath. I didn't mean it like that, B. I looked across the workshop at Silas's card above the bench, the clock that's waiting to be wound. And I felt the sentence settle into place like a gear finding its arbor. Snug, permanent, load-bearing. It explained 34 years in a handful of words. Nobody ever means it, I said. That's the whole problem. I told her congratulations again and meant it, and hung up. And then I opened the trust's email and typed 4 words I'd been circling all night. I'd be honored. When can we start? You should know how I got here, because my mother's version has me wandering off a sensible path into the weeds. Here's mine. At 18, I did 1 semester of business administration at the community college, picked because my mother had a speech about pension plans and a framed idea of a daughter behind a desk. That October, our church hired an old man to fix the tower clock at St. Aldrich's after a lightning strike had frozen the movement mid-swing, and I stayed after choir practice to watch him work. His name was Silas Toomey. He was 72 then, hands like tree roots, and he touched that scorched brass the way paramedics touch people. I asked if it was hopeless. He said, nothing's hopeless. Some things are just waiting for somebody patient. I dropped business administration by Thanksgiving, and my mother didn't speak to me for a month, which she called dignity and I later learned to call weather. 11 years I apprenticed in that same brick storefront on Forge Street. escapements, mainsprings, the chemistry of brass patina, the ethics of it. First, do nothing you can't undo. Silas died 2 winters ago, 86, at his bench, which is the only place he'd have agreed to do it. He left me the building, the tools, and a climate system with a death rattle. I live upstairs. I talk to long case clocks more than I talk to my mother. The clocks are more polite. Here's the detail that matters, though, the one I didn't see myself for years. The sign out front says time and repair, no first name, no photograph in the local paper ever. I've declined 3 times. 11 years of work, and I had never once signed a piece, never hung my name where a person could point at it. I told myself that was humility. Keep that in your pocket. We'll need it later. The Whitcomb Heritage Trust met inside the Aldermere Opera House itself, which was theatre, and it worked, drop cloths over the chandeliers, light through arched windows, and above it all the tower, and 1901 mechanism, iron and brass, gone stiff with a century of dust and neglect. One hand frozen at 3:10 like the building had stopped breathing sometime during the Depression and never quite started again. My neck ached climbing the access ladder in the first 5 minutes, and I didn't care. The offer, tower mechanism and chime train, 9 months, $52,000 including materials, fair money, honest scope, the job of my life. Then the trust director slid over the media addendum. A television series called Handed Down, National, The Good Kind, Craftspeople and Vanishing Trades had partnered with the restoration's funders. They'd filmed the progress and the finished tower ringing out over downtown. Cameras, interviews. My mouth went dry in a way $52,000 couldn't fix. I asked for a personal carve-out. No on-camera interviews. Credit in text only. The director raised an eyebrow. Most contractors ask for more camera, not less. But she allowed it, and I signed with the fountain pen Silas left me. And if my hand shook, nobody said so. On the way out, a woman flagged me down in the parking lot. Mrs. Halloway, the retired county archivist, gardening gloves and no preamble. Wilhelmina Ostrander, I'm still cross with you, you know. I asked what I'd done. 2 years ago, we invited you to speak at the Historical Society, the Vanishing Trades lecture series. We wanted your church clock photographs. You turned us down flat. Didn't even write back yourself. I stood there in the gravel with my contract under my arm. I had never received any invitation. Mrs. Halloway, I said slowly. Who told you I turned it down? Before I tell you what, she answered, you need one more piece of Silas, because he's load-bearing too. 3rd year of my apprenticeship, St. Aldrich's again, the big brass fusee movement this time, a tooth sheared clean off the great wheel after a botched wind by a well-meaning deacon. I was 21 and ambitious, and I wanted to make the repair invisible. I'd planned the whole thing, a soldered patch, filed flush, polished to match, a magic trick. Silas watched me lay it out, then set his root-knuckled hand flat on the wheel. What happened to this gear? I said a bad wind, too much torque. So it's true, then. The brake, I said, obviously. Then why are you about to make it lie? He showed me instead. A sacrificial pinion, a new tooth pinned proud where anyone opening the case could see the repair, stamped with the date. A little scar of new brass standing out against the old, stronger than the wheel had ever been. Clockmakers still find it and know exactly what failed and why it holds. The gear has run for 14 years. What he said while we filed it is the closest thing I have to a religion. We don't hide our repairs. We mark them so the next hand that opens this case knows exactly what broke and why it's strong now. I have applied that sentence to 1100 mechanisms. Mantle clocks, cradles, a carousel calliope, one entire opera house tower. Here is what I had never once applied it to, and I can see it now from this distance. Myself. My whole life in that family was a hidden repair. Sand yourself smooth, match the finish, vanish into the case. Don't be the scar on mother's mantle. 11 years I gave other people's broken mechanisms their dignity back. And the whole time my own name was a stripped gear I kept quietly replacing with a smooth one, never stamped, never dated, never mine. Mrs. Halloway was about to hand me the file that opened it. She looked at me funny in that parking lot and said, "Why, your mother, dear. She answers for you." I'll come back to Mrs. Halloway, because I made myself verify before I let it become true. First, Sunday dinner, where my mother ran her counterattack like a quarterly review. She waited for the pot roast to land and then announced to the table, not to me, that's the technique, that the $18,000 Grandma and Grandpa had set aside years ago for Billy's shop would be held for wedding costs instead. Weddings come first, the climate system will keep. The climate system, for the record, was 13 years past its service life and cycled like a man clearing his throat before bad news. Shellac needs a stable shop. Brass polish needs a stable shop. A humidity swing at the wrong hour can pit a movement I'd spent 40 hours truing. She knew none of that and all of it. She didn't need the schematic to know where to press. And then the second barrel, delivered with a smile to the gravy. The county assessor's office is hiring, by the way. A real desk. Something I can say out loud at church when people ask about you. There it was again. Her one commandment, be sayable. I did not fight at the table. You don't win at her table. The table is hers. I did the math on the drive home instead. 52,000 minus materials minus 9 months of living. The Aldermere job would carry the shop, but not a new climate system too. So I picked up night work, servicing antique pocket watches for a jeweler in Waterloo, 10 to 1 in the morning, 3 nights a week. Days under a frozen tower, nights truing balance wheels under a loop. You want to know what a woman's worth in my family? Check what she's allowed to sacrifice sleep for. Now, Mrs. Halloway. She forwarded me the email chain that week, apologizing for the fuss, and I sat at my bench and read my own obituary in my mother's prose. The lecture series invitation sent to my old contact address, my parents' house, from back when I was an apprentice and had no address of my own, and the reply from my mother's account, polite as a sympathy card. My daughter is no longer working in this field. Please remove her from your list and do not contact her again. No longer working in this field. I checked the date. It was the same month I'd finished the calliope for the county museum. She'd seen it in the paper, uncredited, and asked why I wasted my light on other people's junk. Mrs. Halloway, bless her filing cabinet memory, recalled at least 2 other approaches over the years. A trade school career day, a regional guild invitation, same address, same answering service, each one declined in my name, kindly. Finally, I want to be careful here, because it matters. I don't think my mother sat cackling in the dark. I think she truly believed she was steering a wayward daughter around potholes. Every door she closed was, in her arithmetic, one less chance for me to stand in public wearing coveralls and shame her. That's what made it worse. Malice you can argue with. Arithmetic just runs. I sat there a long time with the shop quiet around me, all those rescued mechanisms ticking softly, and I understood the shape of my own life for the first time. My mother didn't hide me from the world. She hid the world from me, and called it housekeeping. I didn't call her. There was no version of that call where anyone heard a stripped gear and thought to replace it properly. Instead, I went to work under a tower somebody built in 1901, and I started climbing. The access scaffold went up inside the Aldermere Clock Tower on a Tuesday in November, a steel platform ringed by 4 stopped faces, iron hands frozen mid-hour under decades of pigeon dust. The first day I did what Silas taught me to do with any patient. I sat on the deck, 1 arm's length from the great wheel, and I just looked. Up close the mechanism came apart into its own logic, a fusee chain worn smooth by a century of winding, a strike train silent since before my grandmother was born, the maker's confidence still alive under all that grime. I laid my palm a few inches above the plates, not touching. Silas's ritual. You introduce yourself first. 9 months, I told it. I've got you, and I need you to hear this next part the way it happened, plain, no violins. While I was up there, the venue manager walked her clipboard across the lobby below and called up through the tower access door, friendly as a doorbell. Big year coming. We're booked solid after your reveal. First event locked in already. September wedding, Ostrander Whitcomb party. Any relation? The platform did not move. I did not move. Somewhere above my head, the strike train sat silent, waiting on its hour. My sister, of course. Paige wanted the finest hall in the county, and the finest hall in the county was going to be fine because of me. And nobody in my family had connected those 2 facts, because connecting them would require saying my name and the word horologist in the same sentence. Distant, I called down, which is the truest thing I've ever said through a tower door. So there it was, the whole second half of my story laid out like a job sheet. Every hour of the next 9 months, I would be restoring the clock tower of my sister's wedding. Quick pause, because I need to ask you something. If you ever discovered your own family was quietly closing doors you never even saw, how did you find out, and what did you do? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if you're new here, subscribe, because what my mother did when she saw my name on that contract, you should hear it from me. My mother came to the workshop in December. 34 years, and it was her first time through that door. She stood in the middle of my shop, the wall of loops and mainsprings, the cabinet of movements waiting for their turn, 11 years of resurrections, and she looked at none of it. She stood the way you stand in an airport lounge, coat on, purse held in both hands, a woman refusing to check her bags into my life. I'll come to it, she said, and came to it. Withdraw from the Aldermere contract. I'll give you 15,000, more than the climate system, more than Grandma's money. Consider it a business decision. I asked her to explain the business. She did. And I'll say this for my mother. When she finally shows you her ledger, she doesn't flinch. The wedding was the merger of her lifetime, an Ostrander marrying a Whitcomb, and every variable needed managing. A sister on scaffolding at the venue was a variable. A sister in coveralls when the in-laws did their walkthrough was a variable. One wrong impression, Billy. People decide things about a family. I listened all the way to the end. Then I told her the truth in the only language I fully own. This one isn't reversible, Mom. First rule of my trade. Never do what you can't undo. I signed. It's load-bearing now. She looked at me for a long moment, and something moved behind her face. That wasn't anger. Inventory. Maybe a recount coming out wrong. At the door, she paused with her hand on the frame Silas planed by hand in 1979. Then stay off the ladders in September, she said, and was gone. And the bell over the door rang bright and stupid into the quiet. $15,000 to not exist at my sister's wedding. My father came by 2 weeks later with a box of shortbread cookies and a thing he needed to put down. He walked the shop slow, touched the Calliope's carved horse like it might startle, then sat on the stool by the stove and told me about the winter coat. My mother, 14 years old, at St. Aldrich's parochial school. Her father, my grandfather Otto, I never met him, was the town's night clockwinder. 30 years climbing that same Aldermere tower with a hand crank and an oil can before the mechanism was ever electrified. And the girls at pickup, the ones with heated cars, used to do a bit when Sandra walked past. They'd mime winding an invisible crank, elbow going in slow, exaggerated circles, just loud enough. Clock girl walks funny. Clock girl's coat smells like oil. Her coat had newspaper stuffed in the lining one whole winter because there wasn't money for a new one, and the smell of the old wool never quite left it, my father said, looking at his hands. She showed me the coat once when we were courting, then never again. Made me swear. He took a cookie he didn't eat. The day you told her you were quitting business school for clockwork, she cried in the garage where you couldn't see. Not because she thinks the work is beneath anybody. Meaning, because she spent 40 years getting the oil smell out of this family's coat, and you walked back up that same tower on purpose. We sat with that. The stove ticked. It doesn't make it right, he said finally, which was the bravest sentence of his marriage. But you should have the whole ledger. Then he asked me not to tell her he'd told me, and he went home to her, the way he always goes home to her, and I sat alone with the cookies and a brand new problem. It is so much easier to fight a villain than a wound wearing your mother's coat. The wedding invitation arrived in April, heavy cream stock, the Aldermere's tower pressed into it blind, which meant I could feel my own job under my thumb like Braille. Beautiful thing. And behind it, 2 days later, the phone call with the terms. My mother's list voice. The Whitcombs would be hosting relatives from 4 states. The photographer was booked for the walkthrough. And I would attend. She was glad I'd attend, she said, and I believe she was, as Paige's sister, who was between jobs. It's simpler, Billy. One evening, you'll say you're between jobs. Don't embarrass us twice. Twice. I stood in my shop with the phone against my ear, looking at the wall where 11 years of other people's treasures had gotten their names back, and I want to be honest with you about the pull of it. Every family has a currency, and mine pays in one coin, being no trouble. I had been rich in it my whole life. All I had to do was stay rich one more evening. Instead, I looked at the RSVP card with its 2 little boxes and its blank line for names, and I wrote in the good ink, in my steadiest lettering, Wilhelmina Ostrander, horologist, Aldermere Opera House, attending, no +1, no explanation, just the truth in a single line. I walked it to the mailbox on the corner that same hour, so I couldn't reconsider. And when the lid clanged shut, it sounded exactly like an arbor seating home. There are adjustments you can back out and adjustments you can't. I stood on the corner in the April wind and understood calmly, both fully, that I had just made the second kind. My mother received the truth by mail. She did not call. Her silence had a size to it. The next months I can give you in strokes the way the tower painter once gave the numerals their gilding. Winter night shifts at the jeweler's, truing balance wheels until 1 in the morning, sleeping 5 hours, then up the tower by 8. Spring, the pigeon dust surrendered inch by inch. Under it, a fusee chain nobody had cleaned since before my grandmother was born came back with a shine the maker absolutely meant. I logged every oil, every replacement part, in the bound ledger Silas kept his in. Some nights I fell asleep up there on the deck, flat under gears that were slowly remembering how to move. And every few weeks the funders visited. That is how I met Rosalind Whitcomb, Theo's mother, chair of the trust, a woman my mother's age who wore quiet like other people wore jewelry. First visit, she climbed the access ladder in her good suit without being invited, sat on an overturned crate beside me without being asked, and studied the escapement for a full minute. "Deadbeat," she said finally. "Recoil originally," I said. "We're converting it for accuracy. The trust approved the change last month." She nodded the way examiners nod. No small talk about my clothes, no translation of me for the donors. She asked about lubricant viscosity the way other people ask about weather, and listened to the answers. On her third visit, she said conversationally, "Tower Ward, you're the bride's sister. I put it together from the trust paperwork." A pause, one gear tooth long. "Odd. Your family told us you were between jobs." I kept my eyes on the great wheel. "I'm never between jobs," I said, "just between thank yous." Rosalind Whitcomb laughed exactly once, like a spring releasing. And from that day forward, there were 2 women in the county who knew precisely what I was worth. In June, the producer from Handed Down came to schedule the finale segment. A kind man with a gray ponytail and an editor's ruthlessness. The series wanted the tower alive, not roped off, but doing what it was restored to do. The first event on the books after final calibration was the September wedding, and the Trust's media clause covered venue events. He was already talking drone shots. I reminded him of my carve-out, no personal interviews. He didn't argue. He did something worse. He was honest. "We'll respect that, Ms. Ostrander, but understand what it means. We film the tower either way. The story airs either way. Your name is in the trust documents and the credits. That part isn't yours to hide anymore. The only thing you control is whether the person in the story is a name on a black screen or a woman standing under her own work." He let that sit, then added gently the sentence that followed me around for a month. "In my experience, when the subject won't speak, someone else always will. Stories don't stay unnarrated, they just change narrators." I climbed back up the scaffold after he left and lay under the finished strike train. And for the first time, the silence up there didn't feel like sanctuary. It felt like a draft coming through a joint I'd never sealed. All my life I'd told myself invisibility was humility, but invisibility isn't a neutral act, not really. It's a vacancy, and vacancies get filled. My mother had been narrating me for 34 years to archivists and guild boards and future in-laws, and I had held the door for her by saying nothing. I could keep hiding from the camera. I could not keep hiding from the name I had finally learned to stamp. Paige came to the workshop in July, 7 weeks out from the wedding, carrying fabric swatches as a passport. She had never seen the shop either. Unlike our mother, she looked, wandered the benches, touched the calliope's mane, picked up a mainspring winder and put it down like it might be loaded. "Has it always smelled like this?" "Oil and brass polish," I said, "since 1979. She circled a while, swatches forgotten, then sat on Silas's stool and came apart a little, in the contained way pageant girls are taught. "The Whitcombs were lovely," she said. That was the problem, lovely in a language she was still learning. They talked about heritage grants and provenance, and she'd nod and file words away to look up in the car. Mom had the wedding scheduled down to the minute, including, she laughed wetly, a family photo slot timed for when the film crew broke for dinner. She thinks of everything. Then she looked around my shop at 11 years of patient repairs and said the thing she'd actually come to say. "You're lucky, B. Nobody expects anything from you." She meant it kindly. That's the worst part. I handed her back her swatches and said as gently as the truth allows, "That's not luck, Paige. That's a sentence. I've just finished serving it." She left with wet eyes and perfect posture. And at the door, she stopped, and for a second I saw the 8-year-old who used to hide in my room when our mother's disappointment went looking for a target. "The film crew," she said. "Mom got their dinner break in writing. She planned around you, Billy. She always plans around you." The door closed, the bell rang. 7 weeks out, and both of us finally knew the seating chart. We struck the scaffold on the last Friday in August, and the Aldermere got its tower back. I wish I could hand you what happened at 4 o'clock that afternoon. The great wheel turning under its own weight for the first time in decades, the strike train catching, and then, out over the whole downtown, 124 years of silence broke into sound. For notes, then the hour, clean and enormous, rolling out over rooftops and the highway and every porch in Cedar Falls. People stopped on the sidewalk and looked up. The trust director stood in the tower stairwell and forgot to finish her sentence. The inspection passed without a note. And then 2 men from the trust did something I hadn't requested and couldn't prevent. They mounted a small brass plaque by the tower's ground floor door, per foundation policy, the same policy that credits architects and dead engineers. Tower mechanism restoration, W. Ostrander, time and repair, this year. 4 inches of metal. My name in public at the scale of 2 fingers. I stood in front of it longer than I will admit to you. And I thought about a sign with no first name and a career of unstamped repairs, and I felt the plaque doing something no therapy had managed. It made the work exist in the same world as me. That's when I heard heels on marble. My mother, with the wedding planner, doing their walkthrough. She saw me, saw the plaque, and read it the way you'd read a lab result. For a moment nothing on her face moved at all. Then she turned to the planner with her hostess smile and said, indicating the doorway, indicating my name, "A drape would soften this corner, don't you think? Something long." The planner made a note. My mother walked on into the tower stairwell her daughter had raised from the dead, trailing a to-do list, planning her drape. The night before the wedding, I had a legitimate reason to be in the tower. Final calibration check, contractor's privilege, and I used it the way people use churches after hours. I climbed to the deck one last time, a foot under the strike train, and I talked to the mechanism the way I used to talk to Silas, which is to say quietly, and expecting better answers than I deserve. Tomorrow the hall below would be full of Whitcombs and Lilies and a film crew, and somewhere in the middle of it, my family's version of me and my own version were going to occupy the same 100 feet of marble for the first time. "We don't hide our repairs," I said to the great wheel. "We stamp them so the next hand knows what held." So I set my terms plainly, the way you set an escapement. I would go as a guest and a sister, and I would be glad, genuinely, because Theo is a good man and Paige, under all the pageant lacquer, is my sister. I would not perform. I would not campaign. I would not stand in front of any camera on purpose. But if the truth walked up and asked me a direct question, I was done lying to its face. That was the whole boundary. It fit on an index card. It had taken me 34 years to draft. I climbed down, locked up my kit, and my phone buzzed in the dark stairwell. The producer, looking forward to tomorrow. "Heads up, someone from your family called the network this afternoon, introduced herself as the family spokesperson, wanted to preview our questions." I stood under the tower with the phone glowing in my hand. Of course she had. Narrators don't retire. They have to be replaced. The producer had declined her, politely and completely. Network policy, no third-party approvals. And per the transparency clause, he was obligated to tell the trust's contractor about the contact, meaning me. My mother had called a national television network to manage my footage. And the only thing she'd accomplished was making sure I heard about it with time to think. There's a lesson in there about control, but she wasn't taking my calls to hear it. Wedding morning was blue and merciless, the kind of September day photographers pray for. My phone lit up at 9. Paige, just keep it vague tonight, B, please, just tonight. Vague. The family's word for me, in the end, not a lie exactly, a soft focus, a drape in front of a plaque. I typed and deleted an answer 4 times, then sent the only thing that was true and kind at the same time. I'll be exactly your sister. Promise. I put on the deep teal dress, the only thing I own that has never been within 10 feet of a solvent tray, and I looked in the mirror over Silas's wash basin. Not between jobs. Not a little lost. A woman with 9 months of a tower in her shoulders and her own name freshly stamped in brass, going to a wedding where the script called for her to be scenery. My mother had a plan with a drape in it and a photo slot in the crew's dinner break. The network had a plan with a drone shot in it. And I had an index card. In my trade, when 2 forces pull a joint in opposite directions, the joint doesn't get to stay neutral. It holds, or it opens along the oldest crack. I drove to my sister's wedding to find out which I was. One question while the guests are being seated. If stepping into the light would cost you the only version of your family that was ever kind to you, do you still step in? Answer me honestly down in the comments, because in about 10 minutes of this story, that question stopped being hypothetical for me in front of 210 people. Here's what I'll say about my sister's wedding, and I say it without a gram of irony. It was beautiful. The lobby was drowning in white peonies. The quartet was good, and when Paige came down the grand staircase, every baluster of which I had steadied like a patient, even I forgot the staircase. She was radiant, and Theo looked at her the way Silas used to look at unrestorable movements that got restored anyway, and I cried actual tears into an actual monogrammed napkin because she is my sister, and I am not made of brass. My mother ran the event like a conductor, and I'll give her this forever, she was magnificent. Every transition greased, every great aunt shepherded, every variable managed. Almost every variable. Because through the ceremony and into the reception, quietly, on long lenses from the mezzanine, the handed-down crew was filming the tower being alive, ringing the half hour, ringing the hour, doing exactly what it was built to do. Guests kept looking up at the sound, at the tower window visible through the atrium glass. You could watch it travel table to table, the little upward drift of chins, Whitcomb cousins from 4 states asking each other, who fixed that? And somewhere behind the cake table there was now a bare brass plaque, because at 4 that afternoon I'd been told a woman from the trust had moved a decorative drape and asked the venue manager in writing that it stay moved. Rosalind Whitcomb raised her champagne to me across 40 feet of marble, a toast the size of a secret. And I watched the producer notice that toast, track it back to me, and check his watch against the light. The dinner break my mother had negotiated was in 20 minutes. The segment, I understood with total clarity, was not. He came to my table between the toasts and the cake, crouched by my chair, and kept his voice in the range meant for confessionals. Lights in 10 minutes. One segment, the horologist under her own tower. The trust confirmed to the network that you're in the room. One sentence, Ms. Ostrander. You can decline and we shoot the tower without you, but I'd be lying if I said it would be the same film. I opened my mouth, and a hand closed on my elbow, warm, manicured, absolute. My mother, smiling her hostess smile at the producer. Excuse us, she's needed for family photos. Steering me through a service door into the back hallway by the kitchen, where the flowers give way to fire extinguishers and the truth of any venue lives. She turned to me, and the smile fell off like a price tag. Not tonight. Don't embarrass us. The old sentence, third time in my life it would matter. And this time I heard everything packed inside it. The newspaper in the coat lining, the mime of the crank arm, 40 years of getting the oil smell off this family. And then my mother, who does not negotiate, negotiated, which is how I knew she was afraid. You step into that light in your little dress and tell them your trade at your sister's wedding, and you make the whole night about you. Do that and don't come to Sunday dinner. I mean it, Billy. I have never meant anything more. There it was, the full price, printed clearly, no hidden fees. The family such as it was, versus the name such as I'd built it. 10 minutes. The kitchen door thumped behind a waiter. Somewhere in the ballroom, 210 people were finishing their salmon under my tower. I didn't raise my voice. In 9 months of night shifts and solvent fumes, I had rehearsed versions of this fight where I was devastating. Standing in the actual hallway, I wanted none of them. Mom. The winter you were 14. The coat with the newspaper in it. Her face went white, then a furious pink. Who told? And stopped, because there was only one who, and he was seating great-aunts 40 feet away, and some part of her chose right there not to spend him. I understand what you've been running from my whole life, I said. I finally do. But Mom, I'm not Grandpa Otto's oil can. I'm not the crank arm they mimed in the schoolyard. I'm the tower. I'm the thing this whole county is standing under tonight, listening to. Her grip on my elbow loosened, not to release me, recalibrating. And then my mother did the last thing in her arsenal, the true last thing. She let me see the wound. Her eyes filled, and her voice when it came was not the records office. It was 14 and wearing a coat that smelled like a lie. Respectable is all I have, Billy. It's all I ever had. The hallway hummed. Refrigeration, probably. I know, I said, and I meant it as tenderly as anything I've ever said. I'm giving it back to you. All of it. I'm only taking my name. I lifted her hand off my elbow the way I lift a clamp when the glue has finally set. No yank, no drama. A quarter turn and it simply lets go because its work is done and the joint is either strong now or it never will be. I walked toward the service door. Behind me, she said, quiet, almost to herself. You'll regret this. And for the first time in my life, it sounded less like a curse than a question. I pushed the door open into the light. The camera was already running. They killed the uplights on the dance floor and brought up the tower washed through the atrium glass, and 210 conversations rolled to a stop as a 124-year-old mechanism struck the half hour over the reception. People who had been dancing under it for 2 hours heard it for the first time as something more than decor. That's what sound does at the right moment. It's the difference between a room and a revelation. And into the hush the host asked me, soft, and who are you? Wilhelmina Ostrander, I said. I restored the tower. It took 9 months and 124 years. A ripple, laughter, and awe getting along for once. He asked what the work was really, under the mechanics. And I gave him Silas, because the truth is I've only ever had the one sermon. My teacher used to say, we don't hide our repairs. We mark them so the next hand knows what broke and why it's strong now. Everything up there has failed at least once. That's not the shameful part. That's the load-bearing part. I watched that land on faces, on the trust director, on a Whitcomb cousin. On my father standing at the edge of the marble with his hands folded, crying without fuss, the way insurance men cry. And then the question I'd been bracing for since the hallway. Your family's here tonight, I'm told. Who gets the credit for all this talent? The revenge was right there, gift-wrapped, national, one sentence about a mother who answered letters in my name. I looked into the lens and felt the whole arsenal pass through my hands, and set it down. My teacher was Silas Toomey, who restored this tower in 1988. Everything else I owe to this room. Applause started somewhere near the cake and took the hall like weather. Theo stood first, Rosalind second, then everyone. My sister in white with her hands over her mouth, the tower still humming its half-hour over all of it, and the camera panning the family table found one chair empty, its napkin folded with terrible neatness. My mother had left before the applause came up. She missed the cake. She missed her own triumph is the thing. The wedding of the decade, executed to the minute, and the last minute belonged to the daughter in the little dress. My father stayed. He stood beside me while the crew coiled cables, not saying much, holding 2 glasses of champagne like they were evidence. And finally he touched the sleeve of my teal dress and said, "The clockwinder's granddaughter. Look at you." Which I will keep forever. Paige found me by the plaque, mascara gone abstract, bouquet dangling. For a second, neither of us knew which family we were from. Then she said, "You didn't lie this time." And I said, "I never did." And my sister looked up at the tower window for a long, long moment, doing math it takes decades to do. "It's the most beautiful sound I've ever heard," she said. "It always was." I said it just needed somebody patient. She hugged me with the full pageant-trained core strength of her, and whispered, "The drape was mine to move, by the way." I signed the request. My sister, there's hope in that girl yet. That night, upstairs over the shop, I sat with a cup of tea and watched my inbox do something it had never done. 3 museums, 2 churches, a guild society, a query from a university program, all before midnight, and 1 text from my mother, time-stamped 9:41, which I will translate for you into fluent Sandra. It said, "The drape would have looked better." I laughed alone in my kitchen until the kettle joined in. I didn't answer. Some joints you leave unclamped and let the wood decide. I had spent 11 years restoring other people's mechanisms while hiding mine like a stripped gear. That part of the story aired that night, and it was over. The segment aired the following spring. 11 minutes of a tower and 40 seconds of a woman in teal telling the truth about repairs. Here's the aftermath, measured, because I don't deal in miracles. The shop is booked out 3 years. I hired 2 apprentices. One of them left a finance degree half-finished to learn escapements. When her mother called the shop to ask if I was serious, I said, "Ma'am, nothing's hopeless. Some things are just waiting for somebody patient," and heard my own life click shut like a well-set arbor. The climate system is new. I paid for it myself, which matters to me in a way accountants would understand, after all. My family did not collapse, because families like mine don't collapse. They rebrand. My mother goes to the same church, sits in the same pew, and tells the same women, I'm reliably informed, that her daughter works with historic landmarks. The drape is not mentioned. The wedding is described as featured on national television, with the source of the featuring left gracefully vague. The force my mother serves didn't die at that wedding. It never dies. It just updates its slogans. What changed is smaller and bigger than that. It doesn't run me anymore. Sunday dinners went on without me. And the strangest discovery of my year was that I wasn't hungry at that hour. My father comes by the shop every other Wednesday. He drinks his coffee in the good chair, learns the names of mechanisms the way other men learn ball players, and never once tells me what my mother says about the broadcast. Sometimes love is just showing up on alternate Wednesdays and mispronouncing escapement with total commitment. I'll take it. In my trade, you learn to work with the material you're given. A year on, Paige Whitcomb now, came to the workshop a second time. No swatches, no pretext, carrying the little jewelry box our grandmother left her, its clasp torn out of the wood. She sat on Silas's stool for 2 hours and watched me fit the new hinge and asked real questions and used the word provenance correctly, then grinned at herself. We are learning a new language, my sister and I, slowly, without a phrasebook. And then one Wednesday in October, my father arrived carrying something wrapped in a dish towel, holding it the way you hold other people's newborns. Grandma's pocket watch, the good one, the one nobody was ever allowed to wind but her. Stopped for years, the crystal cracked in a starburst. It had been broken, I gathered, for a long time, hidden in a drawer, the way we hide what shames us. Tucked inside the towel was a note, one line in the slanted hand I'd know anywhere. If you have time. No apology, no signature. My mother doesn't speak that language, and at 62, she isn't going to learn. But in her native tongue, in the grammar of a woman who spent her life hiding every crack she ever suffered, handing me a broken thing and trusting me to mend it was the longest sentence she had ever said to me. I fitted a new crystal, cleaned the movement, stamped the inside of the case back the way Silas taught me, small, dated, honest. I sent it back with no invoice. Some work you do for the record. I'm Wilhelmina Ostrander, 35 now. And this year, when strangers ask what I do, there's a brass plaque, a broadcast, and a booked calendar that answer before I can. But I answer anyway, out loud, first person, every single time. If I've learned one thing worth the price I paid for it, it's this. You can spend your whole life waiting for your family to say your name right, or you can stamp it yourself and let the work say the rest. If this story stayed with you, the dinner where they told her to lie, the tower she brought back to life, the chair that sat empty when her name finally rang out, share it with someone whose work goes unseen. And if you believe quiet skill outlasts loud opinions, subscribe. There's a new story every week about quiet women finding their voice, and one of them might sound like yours.